And welcome to this talk on the history of Little Chelsea. Now, first question is, what's the justification? What are the historical reasons for this area of Grove Road and South Street being called Little Chelsea? Answer, none whatsoever. You've all been brought here on a wild goose chase. The Little Chelsea invention, really, was about 30 years ago by local estate agents who thought they'd bump up the price in this area by saying it was all a little bit boho and all the rest of it. So that really is the only reason. The Little Chelsea didn't really occur in anybody's speech or writing until about 1990. The proper name for the area is Southbourne, and you can add an E to the Bourne, or you can add up the South and the Bourne. It doesn't matter, it depends on which old map you look at, but really the area is Southbourne. And this is a lovely watercolour that was painted in 1852 by a lady called Louisa Paris. And she just moved in to her brand new house at Cornfield Terrace. And she was looking out at from the back of her house across the fields to South Street. And where you can see all the bundles of corn, etc., that's where St Saviour's Church was going to be built 15 years later. This is a map. This is the old fig map, so we're talking about 1816, 1817, and you can see in the middle of the picture there the area of Southbourne, really just no more than a small hamlet. Of course, the population of Eastbourne at this time, round about 2,500. You can see in the bottom right the area of Sea Houses, Old Town. Well, we call it Old Town now, it wasn't the Old Town then, is just off the top of the map. And you can see the road coming down from the north, Watery Lane, now called Southfields Road. And you can see just to the left of that, the Bourne Stream, ponding and flooding as it goes, and that was one of the reasons why it was called Watery Lane, because it flooded really quite frequently. And it arrives at a road that we currently will know as Grove Road, but at the time just either didn't have a name at all and was simply called Southbourne. Other people called it a continuation of Watery Lane. And if you look at some maps, it was actually called South Street as well, and didn't become in Grove Road in popular terms until certainly after the 1850s. So we're going to have a look at Grove Road first of all, and then have a wander down South Street. This is the Terminus Hotel, often called the Squirrel, which is situated broadly where the Eastbourne Framing Centre is now, opposite the station. This was here, started out as a farmhouse, became a pub hotel a little bit later on, and was demolished about 1870. And you can see the little barn at the side there, and we're going to wander around the back of that barn and take a look from the other side. So you're standing in what is now Ivy Terrace, and you're looking back towards the, in the direction of the station. You can probably just see there a little bit of flood water, because the Bourne Stream, as I said, used to flood on both sides of the road. This was really quite common. And the little track that you see just in the front of that picture is a track that leads from really where the library is now, along broadly the line of Terminus Road and Langley Road to Sea Houses, where the Leafy Hall is. And that was, apart from South Street, that was the only way of getting from A to B. So this is a map of 1875, only 35 years after that first map that I showed you. And you can see at the top the station has been built, the railway has arrived in Eastbourne, and that is in fact the third of Eastbourne's railway stations, built in 1872, so really quite young as far as this map is concerned. A fourth one was to arrive in 1886. And you can see really that the new town, the new resort of Eastbourne has really got underway in a very short period. It's only 25 years since the railway has arrived, but you can see that the whole of the Gilded Road and Hyde Gardens area has been developed with all its fine terraces and villas. In the middle of the picture you can see that big white blank where the York Road and Hyde Road area was yet to be developed. That came along about 15 years after this map was drawn up. And I think one of the reasons why it was a blank is that that area was originally a brick field where a lot of clay was extracted for making bricks. But you can certainly see on as we look at it, the left-hand side of the road, not very much has happened at all. In fact, if you look at Grove Road, running down the left-hand side of that picture, from really the station down to where the town hall is at the bottom, not very much has happened at all. It was certainly one of the later roads to be developed. So we're going to take a look, first of all, in some detail at the bottom of the road. You can just sort of see there on the far left, that's Old Orchard House. A very fine house with its lovely drive, which was occupied by Robert Insull, who was the Duke of Devonshire's agent in Sussex. And really George Wallace's boss, I'm sure you must have heard of George Wallace, his steward in Eastbourne. So really Insull was his boss. But you can see here, and this is 1875, there's really nothing in this left-hand side area. Up at the top right of the picture, you can see that building has taken place, not shops, but all little private villas with their own little garden. Ivy Terrace has started to be developed, but then as you come up Grove Road, on the left-hand side as you come up the road, there's still a large open space and little buildings here, really where the library is now. This is standing in Grove Road, looking down at the police station. This is Eastbourne's police station. To the side of that, on the right, is the Vestry Hall. And this hall was built in 1859, really as the centre of gravity changed from the old town to the newer part of Eastbourne. The Vestry Committee, which was the predecessor of the local board and the local council, always met at the Lamb Inn, but then started to meet in this Vestry Hall. And sometimes, apparently, the hall was so crowded with people wanting to participate in the political affairs of the town that some people stood outside and shouted through the window, which I thought was tremendous. And then just to the side of that, this is all that remains of the Bourne Stream. Certainly by the time we get to the 1870s, 1880s, the Bourne Stream had gone into culvert, but this small pond was what remained of it. And this was called the Sheep Wash Pond, because the sheep were brought down every June to be washed, and they were driven through this pond. And at the time, people took the advantage of having all sorts of jollies and fairs and fetes and that sort of thing on the area opposite. And there's the area opposite. This is really the south side of Ivy Terrace, now completely developed, of course. But you can see that construction has just started. Previously, this site was used for fairs and circuses and all of that sort of thing. Now just above that, and this is on the left-hand side of Grove Road as you go up towards the Town Hall, was this lovely building, Rose Cottage. Built in 1777 and occupied by John Pigott, who was an MP and the Attorney General for a time. So really quite a big cheese. He sold the property on in 1830 to a chap called John Graham, who came from a very well-established Lake District family, and in fact himself invested a lot of money in Eastbourne. And John Graham paid just £30 for this property because it was said to be haunted, and nobody else would buy it. So there we are. And that was demolished round about the 1880s to make way for development. Meanwhile, on the other side of the road, and we're talking about the very early 1900s now, the old police station and the Vestry Committee and the pond were all swept away, and this was put in its place. I think an absolutely wonderful building. The Duke of Devonshire gave the land. It was opened in 1904 by the Duchess of Devonshire, and Andrew Carnegie, the Scots-American billionaire, we would say now, contributed £10,000 towards the cost. And he was made a freeman of Eastbourne a year later for his trouble. But this accommodated the School of Art, the local museum, the library, the Technical Institute, and really housed the beginnings of Eastbourne Grammar School. It was only in 1902 that there was non-private education, as it were, for boys over the age of 11. With the 1902 Education Act. And even then, people of a certain means still had to pay certain school fees. So Eastbourne Grammar School really started here with 9 people, 9 boys, and was here until 1919. So this beautiful, beautiful building, highly prestigious, reduced to rubble in 1943 by you-know-who. Massive damage done, of course, and on the other side of the road, the properties here weren't seriously affected. They were capable of being renovated, but that certainly wasn't true of the Eastbourne Fire Station that was located behind the Institute. Now here's a picture of the same site with all the rubble cleared away, of course. This is 1956, before the new library had started. And this was a meeting of the Civil Defence. We sort of forget Civil Defence, don't we, these days? And this was the end, apparently, of an experimental mass feeding exercise as part of Civil Defence rehearsals. And you might just see behind where the people are standing a few little chimneys and a long hut. And that was the Victory restaurant, which was one of a number of British restaurants that there were in the town until the mid-50s. And the whole idea of British restaurants, it was sort of like school meals for adults, really, for people who'd been displaced from their homes by bombing and all of that sort of thing, to make sure that they got at least 1 square meal a day. So this is where the Victory restaurant was. Disappeared at about this time in 1956. So that was all superseded, of course, by the library that we know today, now well over 50 years old, 55 years old. This opened in '64. And this relief, which is still on the side, caused a bit of consternation at the time when the building opened, because as you can see, the chap was showing his credentials, and there are all sorts of letters to the paper about purchasing fig leaves, etc. So we're looking, you know this shot, I'm sure, looking up Grove Road on the left-hand side. The whole of the left-hand side was developed or redeveloped in one go, 1885, 86 really. And there's another shop with all the lovely gas lamps, etc., etc. And then in the middle is the strict Baptist church. And this was here before the shops were built, so it's sort of sandwiched in the middle of the parade. This opened in 1881, and so many of the congregation were shopkeepers that it actually had the nickname of the Grocer's Church. You might recognise this, Freeman Hardy and Willis. One of them. The whole character, really, of Grove Road, particularly in the 1920s, 1930s, was real high-quality shopping. I'm not necessarily saying that FHW was high quality, but there are lots of costumiers and furriers and jewellers and that sort of thing. In fact, a lot of people did call it the Bond Street of Eastbourne, particularly in the 20s and 30s. And Jaeger were here. Jaeger came to Eastbourne very, very early, in 1905, and they were here until about 1960. Jaeger started off as being sort of very different. They borrowed the name Jaeger from a Dr. Jaeger, who was a German, who did some research in all the benefits of woolen underclothing. And he had nothing to do with the company at all, but they just stole his name. And really, they started life with only about 20 shops in the whole country, 3 of which were in the southeast and 1 of which was in Eastbourne. So they're selling all their woolly underwear. It's like Daymart, really, if you remember Daymart. And of course they went high fashion, didn't they, round about 1930s, and then Jaeger were here, as I say, until about 1960. I'm putting this this in because I think this is super. It's got cycles on one side and ciggies on the other, cycles and ciggies in one shop. And you might remember Hope & Co, who just recently closed and were in the town for well over 100 years. This was one of the high-quality outfitters that there were. Now, above this shop, it says Clough's Commercial College, but prior to that, this is where Eastbourne High School for Girls started, in just one room. On the opposite corner, which is, this is Hyde Road, on the opposite corner there's a charity shop now, but previously that was the first telephone exchange in Eastbourne and was there for quite some while, I think right up to 1920 when it moved to what I call still the main post office, fairly near to the station, now just the mail centre. And there we are. I'm sure you recognise that shop today. This is Bradford's Dairy, which is further up the road, opposite the now defunct police station. And I think this is such an atmospheric picture. You can see the gas mantles there, and you can almost feel the coolness of that marble counter. Absolutely tremendous picture, I think. And this is the entrance to Bath Road, still not made up after all these years. And both sides of the road were built for railway workers. On the side where the picture is being taken from were really quite small cottages for the ordinary workers, and those ones on the other side, which were bay-windowed, were for the supervisors. In the north of England, we would call this Gaffer's Row. And it's just a nice characterful picture of Hyde Road. Really quite an early photo. It's still got the gas lamps there. And here it is today. Largely unchanged in character. It's an area that I think has survived very well and been kept very well. And I'm sure you know where this is. Good old Tesco's. Let's have a quick look at the history of this. This was the Mechanical Institute, sometimes called the Technical Institute, which was there for a long time. Previously, this had been a series of cottages which had been knocked down in around about 1830, and it was the beginning of the workhouse in Eastbourne. At this location, and it was to do with weaving and the assembly of garments, etc. So really the beginning of the workhouse closed here in about 1830. And you can see there Eastbourne Motor Mart. Now, goodness me, this is a little bit later. This is probably the 1960s. This is the Cosmopolitan Coffee Bar. One of the first coffee bars in Eastbourne, and this was so cool. It was full of people who smoked gauloises and had duffel coats. And, I can remember I was really too young to go there, and certainly not sophisticated enough to go there. You see on just to the left of that a filling station, a wonderful name for a filling station called Burn-Ups, which I think is tremendous. And here's a picture. Now, the second most interesting thing in this picture is the price of petrol. Look at this. This must be what, round about 1970, and this is 33 pence a gallon. Do you remember those days? 3 gallons for £1. And that's the area today, as you know. Right, let's go back down the road and have a look at the other side of Grove Road. We've really already dealt with the area at the top where the Vestry Hall was and where it was all replaced by the Technical Institute. And then you can see halfway up the road is Grove House. And this is really, I think, where Grove Road got its name from. Grove House was constructed round about 1800. As you can see, quite a fine house in its own grounds, lovely flint wall, big gates with pillars, lots of trees round it. And there's another picture of it. This started off as really a guest house for many, many years, and then round about 1850 was taken over by two ladies, the Mrs. Shoesmith, who operated it for the next 45 years as a private school for young boys, under 11s. And it was demolished in the 1890s, but really quite a fine house. And this is a map of round about the time, just after Grove House had been demolished. The date of this map is 1896. So, you know, time is moving on a bit now, and certainly the population of Eastbourne is growing, but still this area on the west side of Grove Road is really not developed. Things are just not happening. And in fact, in that year of 1896, the whole of the white area on the left actually accommodated the Sussex Royal Agricultural Show. It was that empty. Quite staggering, really. So all of that was eventually dealt with, and the shops that we see on the right-hand side of the road as we go up were built just after 1900, about 17 years after the left-hand side of the road had been built. And I'm sure you will recognise the bookshop. But have you sort of looked through the arch? It's like play school, isn't it? We're going to look through the arch. Eastbourne Market Hall. It took me ages to just sort of discover this or to realise what it was. This was built in 1888, was an absolutely fundamental failure, and closed as a market hall just 2 years later. And the private company that started it all actually went out of business in the early 1890s. It was really just in the wrong place. This was, you know, if you like, the Bond Street of Eastbourne. This, you know, the Meads, the Lower Meads area was where all the, you know, clearly very well-off people lived. and they just didn't go and do their own shopping in the market. The market really should have been somewhere else, I think. So what happened once it had closed down in, as I say, about 1890? The Roman Catholic Church, the first one in Eastbourne, the first proper church in Eastbourne, was in Junction Road, which is on the site of what's now Barclays Bank. And in 1895, the old Lewis Bank, the predecessor of Barclays, decided they were going to redevelop the site, and of course the church, the Stella Maris Church, was going to be turfed off. So they were looking for alternative accommodation, and they were interested in the Market Hall with its arcades, and actually rented it for a number of years, and it became known as the Arcade Church. And there's the inside of it after the church had left. This is probably around about 1920. But the building was used for furniture and construction material storage and all sorts of things, as well as a garage, until 1936, when the new police station was built next to the town hall, and it was taken over as the police motor centre. And of course has only recently been vacated. So a little mystery sort of tucked away at the back there, Eastbourne Market Hall. And in front of all that was this, Maison Flora, with furs and gowns and millinery and blouses, and everything was described, you look at the adverts, as court shoes, court coats, court dresses. I think court just means very expensive, doesn't it? So this was Maison Flora, which flourished until about 1920, when the business closed, really part of the Bond Street scene, as it were, of Grove Road, Eastbourne. And it was then taken over by the Eastbourne Electricity Company as a display showroom. And then in 1947, after nationalisation, and I can see some people grinning in the audience for obvious reasons, operated by Seaboard. And you think, well, yes, what a fine building, what a pity that's disappeared. It hasn't, it's still there. Ta-da! only the ground floor really has been fundamentally converted in the year 2000 to provide the medical practice. And the police station next door, built in 1936, and of course only fairly recently closed, awaiting conversion or redevelopment. Now, we're at Stocks's Bank. Stocks's Bank started out as a nice little site for fairs, St George's Day Fair, and they used to have a toy fair, etc. Certainly up until the 1830s, 1840s. And there's a very sad minute of the Vestry Committee from around about 1830, who actually ran all the poverty programs, the workhouses, etc. And the minute was, a request had been made by the children in the workhouse across the road whether they could have the afternoon off to attend the toy fair on Stocks's Bank. And the answer was no. I thought very sad. Now, when it was known that the population of Eastbourne was sufficiently great, and was just coming up to the magic 23,000 mark as we get towards 1880, it was known that there was going to be an Eastbourne Corporation, a borough council, for the first time. And of course, the first thing they wanted was a jolly good town hall. And their first choice was a vacant site where Boots now is in Terminus Road. But that was going to cost £12,500, far too much. Their second choice was a site in South Street that we'll look at a little bit later, a lot cheaper, £3,500, but still too much. And their third choice was Stocks's Bank at only £3,000. And they eventually decided that this was going to be the location of the first town hall, or Eastbourne's town hall. Local folk got very upset, saying nobody will ever be able to find it. It's miles from anywhere. But lo and behold, that's what they did. And here we are. So I think an absolutely beautiful building, very impressive. Now, you might notice that there's a little hole at the top, waiting for the clock to go in, because they spent all their budget and they had to actually wait. This was commissioned in 83, opened in 86, and they had to wait until 1892 to put the clock in. And I think a lovely clock, Cambridge Quarter chimes, which we all know very well. But in the first couple of years of its existence, they didn't turn it off at 11 o'clock at night. It just chimed all the way through the night, every 15 minutes. Can you imagine? There's a lovely story during the war, a broadcast from Lord Haw, who said, "This afternoon, why did the town hall clock at 3 p.m. only strike twice? This is another example of British inefficiency, etc., etc." A load of absolute rubbish, but designed to lower morale. And the bell inside weighs 1 ton. It's a pretty hefty thing. It doesn't matter about all the detail of this. Building costs 35 plus 10, £45,000. This was equivalent to 3 years of total ratepayer income for Eastbourne in the 1880s. So really quite an expensive proposition. It was built by James Peerless, a local builder who was born in Jevington, or raised in Jevington. He wasn't the first choice. The first choice just couldn't raise the bond necessary, so they got on to James Peerless, who really, I think, did an absolutely tremendous job. It was a fixed price contract, and he lost money on it. But when he died 4 years later, after it opened, he died in 1890, in today's terms, he was worth about £30 million, so he wasn't doing badly. We might come across James Peerless a little bit later on. And if you've not been in the town hall, do go. It's absolutely tremendous. This assembly hall here is just superb. It accommodated a lot of interesting talks in the interwar years. Oswald Mosley spoke here, as did Lord Haw as well. A lot of quite interesting meetings went on. And now used for more genteel things these days. Beautiful sprung floor. The council chamber that's still there, not really used as a council chamber these days. Beautiful oak panelling. Again, if you get the chance, go and have a look. And round the back was this building, Grove Hall. Now, Grove Hall was built in 1890, and it was the church hall, the assembly hall for St. Peter's Church, which was on the corner of not Granville Road and Meads Road. It's now Housing Association, I think, Anchor Housing Flats. So it was originally a church for them, and they sold it round about 1900 to the Congregation Church for temporary accommodation while their new church in South Street was being built. After that, it was used for all sorts of purposes. The Eastbourne Girls High School moved here for a very short time. It was used by the Borough Council for their rating office. It was used by the local police as a parade room. And just round the back, and this is sort of, I suppose, typical of the time, there was a little hut that dealt with what we would call these days STDs. And it had to be located here because nobody else would take it. This is 1918, just after the First World War, and you can understand what went on during the war. The two local hospitals at the time, the Leaf Hospital and the Princess Alice, actually refused to provide this service to the public on the grounds it would injure their donations from the public if they dealt with such an unsavoury subject. This was demolished round about 1970 and became part of the Town Hall car park. Now here's a picture taken in 1900 from the clock tower of the town hall, and it's looking down just in the foreground of that Grove Hall, still there of course, and you can see the chaps playing cricket on the left hand side in the Saffron's ground. And you can see a little lane sort of running away into the distance in the centre of the picture. This was the predecessor of Saffron's Road. And you're looking out across the fields to the north, this will be, towards Elphick's Field, which was going to become Gildridge Park 8 years later. But I think the interesting thing is, here we are at 1900, the development of Eastbourne has been going hell for leather for the past 50 years. An absolute fortune has been spent, and yet we've still got this part of the town not developed at all, absolutely empty. Opposite, I'm sure you recognise this building. This is Caffin's second garage, built in 1911. First one was built in Seaside Road 5 years earlier. Beautiful, beautiful building, and always had upstairs a lovely set of assembly rooms or salons. And these were particularly used in the 1920s and 30s for all sorts of parties and dances and that sort of thing. Very impressive building. And of course opposite, the Our Lady of Ransom Catholic Church. Of course by this time they'd moved out of the old Market Hall just across the road. Something not quite complete in the picture. Oh, there it is, the spire, just sort of added at the end. This was partially consecrated, I think 1901, 1902, but not fully consecrated until 1925, because the rules were at that time that full consecration could not take place until all the debts of the church had been discharged. So they had to wait a bit. Probably took quite a few raffles to do it. Right, we're going to look now at South Street. I'm sure you recognise this, Bibendum, formerly known as the New Inn, built in 1880. There was a New Inn here before, but not quite on this corner. This corner was really previously occupied by a brewer, Cooper's Brewery. It started off as Chapman's Brewery in 1749, a really long time ago, and Cooper took it over round about 1840, and it was there for the next 30 years. And the actual New Inn itself was just, I suppose, 30 or 40 yards down the road, just on the right-hand side there. You can see the sign, New Inn Tap. Now, the New Inn was quite important because it had excellent stabling for horses. And this is where the stagecoaches finished up in Eastbourne, particularly from their trips from London. And the stagecoach used to leave Charing Cross at 6 a.m. in the morning and arrive in Eastbourne at about 2 p.m. So it's an 8-hour journey from London. About the same as Southern Region today, I suppose. And people used to meet the stage and to talk to the coachman to ask the time. They asked for Horse Guard's time because there was no other way of knowing the time. Because the coach every morning would drive past Horse Guards, and that was the clock that had the national time on, and he used to take the time on his watch, literally bring it to Eastbourne, and people used to alter their watches by the coachman's watch. Isn't that interesting? Horse Guard's time. And this little building on the left is where you could buy your tickets for the stage. And the stage to London from Eastbourne used to leave at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now we're going to take a look at this building. I'm sure you recognise this, the Dickens Tea Room, and it used to be Garner's Newsagents, isn't it, on the left. Outside of the old town, this is just about the oldest building in Eastbourne. 1719 this was built. Really very old. And it's interesting, and we're just going to look at the shop just on the left-hand side, just to see how things change over time. There we are, look at this. Hollow bones. Lapidary. I had to look that up. It's something to do with the cutting and polishing of stones, semi-precious stones. But interesting how these things start off. An advert, of course, for Cooper's Brewery just across the road. And then taken over by R.N. Collins, who came to Eastbourne from London as a professional cricketer, playing for the Eastbourne Club, and set up his own sports shop. Here we are, cricket, football, hockey, and athletic outfitter, and he was an advisor or a coach to Eastbourne College. He had 9 children. And died in 1914, and in fact the business ended up in Grove Road being sold by his grandson Frank Collins in about 1970. And then just to the side of that old building, see that little passageway going through? And it leads to a lovely little terrace of properties built by the Eastbourne Artisans Dwelling Company. Really an early form of housing association. And the Eastbourne Company had only been set up 6 years earlier, and these were built in 1891, so quite an early example of their work. But if you ever get the chance, it's a public little alley. Just go up there and take a look. It's a lovely little terrace. And then along from that is the old courtroom or courthouse, so-called. This is quite early, 1879. I'm not sure whether any magistrates ever sat here, because it wasn't until 1911 that Eastbourne had its own magistracy. Anyway, before that you had to go to Hailsham. This was certainly used by the probation service for a long time. And then next to that, the Masonic Hall. Masonic Hall from round about 1950. Prior to that, it was a church meeting hall for St Saviour's Church, just further down the road. And again, just along from there, this is round about 1900. This is an old Smithy, Blacksmith forge, which was just awaiting redevelopment. The Congregationalists were still in Grove Hall, at the back of the town hall, waiting for their new church to be built. And of course, it's still there today. Lovely listed building. Now, on the other side of the road, welcome to Eastbourne's first theatre. 1798, built by the Fisher family. And it operated as a theatre for about 40 years. So it actually closed, nearly 45 years before what we regard as Eastbourne's first theatres were actually built, the Hippodrome and the Devonshire Park. Round about 1840, this was closed as a theatre and was taken over by, as you can see there, Haynes, builders and upholsterers who also did a lot of carpentry. And I think they came to a fairly rapid conclusion that carpentry, which involves knocking a few coffins together, was a pretty easy way of making money. And of course they went into the undertaker's business. So by 1880 they'd moved across the road. Haynes has always been a key part of Eastbourne life. He was on the local board and then on the first council, and there's been a Haynes of one sort or another involved for a very long time in Eastbourne life. And then, having made a lot of money, they opened this fine building in 1908 on the same site. And I just wanted to mention the dewdrop inn. And really, this is, look at this, 3 courses for only £3.50. This wasn't taken last week, it was about the 1980s. But I mention this, it's really part of, and this is only for people who grew up in Eastbourne. If you didn't grow up, sorry, you just close your minds for the next 20 seconds. As a youngster growing up in Eastbourne, this area had everything in terms of nighttime entertainment. Finch's and Maxim's and the Spartan restaurants and the pubs. It was a really, really lively area and very well behaved as well. There's really no trouble to speak of. This is part of an appeal to look up. Just as you go down South Street, just look up at the quality of some of the buildings there. Lovely sort of rhythm to all this as you walk down the street. Now, who can spot what this is? Built by Caleb Dicklock in the 1860s, the owner of the Lion Brewery. He had sort of quite a handful of pubs that he was operating in Eastbourne. Do you start to recognise it now? No, the Railway Arms. The Dolphin. It didn't change its name to the Dolphin until the 1960s. And again, just another appeal to look up. I'm sure you know where this is, on the side of the little passageway that leads up to York Road. Just look up at the quality of the decorative stonework. It really is absolutely super. Now, this is the end of this section of South Street, and the Eagle pub, I think it's now painted black. This is an old photograph. But I put this in because where the pub is and on the land to the right of it was a lovely ransom strip that was owned by Caleb Dicklock. And of course, the Davis Gilberts, who owned a substantial part of this area of Eastbourne, were absolutely desperate to build Hyde Gardens and Gildridge Road and West Terrace, etc. But Caleb Dicklock held the ransom strip that actually stopped Gildridge Road itself from being connected to South Street. And apparently he made a few bob out of the disposal. Right, we're now going to look at South House. South House was built round about 1750 it was built. And for a long time was a guest house and small hotel. In fact, in the 1820s, it was actually purchased by the New Inn as part of their business. But by the time you get to 1850, it was in residential use. And there was a sea captain, Captain Howard, who lived there, and he wrote a fantastic little commentary of how he would look out of his window all the way across the cornfields to Splash Point, where the Queen's Hotel is today, a view interrupted only by the new Holy Trinity Church that was getting in his way. And he said the little track, as we can see it there going off to the left of the picture, took him down to the Wash, which was a muddy area, or the Wash or the Wish, really the Devonshire Park area. And it was this site that was Eastbourne Council's #2 site to build a town hall. But this was the one that cost £500 too much. And eventually, this fine building, still there of course, featuring Elliott's. Elliott's was really the premier sort of grocer of Eastbourne. It was sort of like Waitrose plus really. And there for a very long time. And it was a sort of store where you did not place your order. They came to you and sat and wrote your order down for you. And an old picture here, but you know that's Urban Ground coffee place now. Right, the final stage of the journey is we're going to look at what was originally called South Terrace, not South Street. It started off as really quite a narrow street. You'll know now that, well, it's an absolute racetrack, isn't it? It's a very, very wide street now. And it was widened in the early 1880s under the Eastbourne Improvement Act. And it was part of an Act of Parliament, the 1879 Eastbourne Improvement Act. So that's when the street was widened. The church was already there. St Saviour's Church was built in 1867. But there wasn't sort of too much else in the street. Really, on the left-hand side, there were just 3 sets of semi-detached villas, which were really, really quite superb. One is still there today, and we'll look at it in a moment. So St Saviour's Church, built on land donated by the Duke of Devonshire, entirely paid for by a chap called Whelpton, who came from Hastings, and he'd made his fortune with Whelpton's pills, and they were in fact mild laxatives. So the entire church was funded by mild laxatives. He required that his son became the first vicar, which happened, and he was there for 30 years. He was then followed by his son, who was there again for another 30 years. So the Whelptons had sort of quite a stronghold on this. And the church itself was, this is before the tower was built, that this church was built by Peerless again, the chap who'd built the town hall. And it is a church of particular quality, 2-star listed, of course. Beautiful, beautiful insides, very, very expensively fitted out. And the local church folk, or the local C of E folk, really got sort of quite jealous of this, because all of a sudden, you know, they had St Mary's Church and Holy Trinity, and then after that Christ Church, just sort of plodding away. And then in 1867, this comes along, a chap with masses of money, and it was all sort of high church. It was sort of Anglo-Catholicism, and there was a resentment of what they called metropolitan religion coming down from London and taking us over. Quite interesting, church politics. But again, if you've not been and you have a chance to go in and look, it is absolutely superb. Beautiful, beautiful. Just outside of that, the scene of a great tragedy. This is a corner of Spencer Road. During the last war, there was a blast shelter, not an underground shelter, a surface blast shelter, air raid warning. About 30 people actually went to the blast shelter that had a direct hit. And it was the biggest single loss of life during the war in Eastbourne, when round about 30 people died. I say roundabout because they didn't quite find all the bits. Very, very sad. In the background, there's a little shop there, the Regent Bakery. And this was said to be, I love the old van this, said to be one of the best bakeries in Eastbourne. Just down from there, Butlers sort of closed quite recently. But it's interesting looking at the history of these premises, because prior to that, a long time ago, it had been the Jaguar dealer for Eastbourne. And I was talking about 3 sets of semi-detached villas. This is the last of the 3 to survive. And this was used as the centre for a number of high calibre doctors and surgeons. It really was a premier sort of private health centre for decades and decades. And now, of course, taken over by a local solicitor. Now, talking of solicitors, on the other side of the road, there's now a modern building, which is a solicitor's office. And this is the building that was on there originally. And this was built by George Wallace, Wallace and Wallace, as a speculative building. And in fact, first mayor of Eastbourne. And in fact, he moved there just for a year or so, while his next far larger house was being built up in Meads. This was originally called Bellevue and later on Crieff House, and was a young ladies' college. And as was typical of some parts of Eastbourne, particularly Terminus Road, the shops developed in the front gardens. and you can see here how the front garden has been taken over. I remember as a child being so impressed by the quality of the furniture in this shop. It really was top-rate stuff. All gone now, of course. Now, finally, we're just going to look at the lower half of South Street. And I'm sure you'll recognise this building. The only Italianate sort of architecture in this bit of Eastbourne, really. Everything that we've looked at so far has been very Gothic, hasn't it? Very sort of pointed and very angular. Before the Second World War, this was the headquarters of the Trade Association and the Labour Party, and a lot of the upper floors was actually used by Plummer Roddice. Plummer Roddice was a very high-class retailer in the town, where C&H Fabrics are now in Terminus Road, and they felt such a duty to their young female unmarried staff that they actually used this building as a hostel for them. After the war, this was used by the Department of Labour, and the Department of Health moved in. And I remember my mother going along there, getting those big tins of white and blue tins of powdered milk, if you remember that. Made us all grow big and strong. And on the other side, again, this is listed. Beautiful terrace, and it's nice to see that in recent years a lot of work and care has been carried out on this. The Clifton Hotel was there for a very long time. Its bar was really sort of dominated by Irish folk who certainly knew how to have a good time. On the right hand side you can just see a little garage, and I've got a lovely little picture. It's clearly a breeding ground for A30s. But, now we're standing in what locals used to call Leafy Lane. The official title of it was Seaside Road. And you think, well, that's wrong, it's called Trinity Trees. At the time this photo was taken, it was called Seaside Road. Trinity Trees came along later. And we're looking across the open square. And in the middle of the square was the Princess Alice tree, planted by, guess who? Princess Alice. Looking the other way, this lovely building that's still there as David Salmon's. Various times it's been used for furniture, and on this occasion it's at Nicholson's, which was a clothing shop. Originally this was a three-storey building, and the fourth storey was only added at a later stage. Now, this picture, I looked for ages for this picture, and I only found it a few weeks ago. There are three really interesting things in here for me. On the left-hand side, you've got S. French with his little trailer, a luggage porter. Now, he was what they would call an outside porter, which meant he wasn't allowed to operate inside the railway station. He could only operate outside, and he would stand on street corners at designated spots waiting for somebody to say, I want to go on holiday or whatever, please take my luggage to the railway station. And I'm sure some days he didn't get any trade at all. If you're ever walking along Grange Road, where the college cricket field is, just have a look at the back of footpath, because there's a little iron mark there that says it's a stand, it's a licensed stand, still there, and it says LPS on it, Licensed Porter Stand, and that's the sort of place where he could go. The other interesting thing is the Church of England Temperance Society. There were 2 or 3 of these stalls dotted around Eastbourne. This is part of the attack against the demon drink, and certainly free or cut price coffee was actually doled out to anybody who wanted it by the volunteers. And then the final thing, it can't have escaped you, is the lines. There are 2 lines running across posh Eastbourne Square all the way down Cornfield Road. What on earth are these lines doing here? Because Eastbourne always resisted trams because they would lower the tone of the place. Eastbourne never had trams. So what's this doing? It's the line for a horse-drawn tram. And it was only there for a couple of years, and it was when the Western parades were being built from the Wish Tower up to Holywell, and a massive amount of chalk was hewn by hand, really, absolutely transforming cliffs that were 100 feet high into all those lovely pathways and everything that we see today on Western Parade. And about 300 men worked on this for a few years. What they did with some of the excess chalk was to bring it by horse-drawn tram down Cornfield Terrace, across this square, down Cornfield Road, to an area at the back of the Beacon, the Armdale, to the Marsh. And all the chalk was deposited there to bring up the level of the marsh so that areas like Tideswell Road, etc., could actually be constructed to provide houses for the artisan classes. So it's lovely to see this picture. And there's, just to give you an impression of the work, this is how the cliffs were being tamed at the time on the lead up to Holywell. Massive, massive construction work. And later, of course, the square changed, and after 1920, we had the War Memorial. It's very interesting, actually, that by tradition, the Angel of Victory, the statue, always faces east against the rising sun. But the one in Eastbourne doesn't. It faces due south. I don't know why. If anybody does know why, do please tell me. And then finally, we're going to stop with a visit to the chemist. This is on the corner of South Street and Cornfield Road. And if you actually look at the step where that lady's standing, it still does say A.R. Brown, established 1860. And X-rays, X-ray machines started to be used in very crude form in the early 1900s. But certainly up until the First World War, there was only one in Eastbourne, not in the hospitals, but actually at the back of the chemist shop, which is where you went to have an X-ray. So that's our journey, really. We started off with the little hamlet of Southbourne 200 years ago. And it's changed a little bit in that time. So that's it. Thank you.